What's going on, everybody? Obscure References back for another episode of Opoon, but guess what? We're still in the Void Month. We're in the last stretches. We got one more week to go if you're reading the legal translations like we do. So I thought now would be a good time as any for me to give you my top 10 flashbacks throughout all of One Piece. And yes, it was a little hard limiting it to just 10, so there are a couple of honorable mentions, but that's what lists are for. That's what lists are for. We can stretch the rules a little bit, just like Luffy. So the way this is gonna work, the way I'm kind of grading these and judging and ranking these, I'm judging them by how they made me feel in the moment, how they fit within the story and the greater themes that they tie into, and if it tells a good story, really, truly, and honestly, it's pretty easy to know if what I like and what I don't like, and some you will be surprised by where I put some of these, and that's just kind of the point of making videos like these, is to kind of stow conversation. Like, I know I'll have some that are lower on my list that you might have at number one, and vice versa, and that's just how opinions are. Everyone has a different one, and that's totally cool. So feel free to have a civil conversation in the comments about where I put certain flashbacks, and I'd be curious to see what your top 10 are. Or if you think I've missed one that's not even on my list at all, feel free to let me know as well. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. But without further ado, I think it's time we get into this. And I think, first of all, I'm going to just name off my honorable mentions so we can just jump right into the top 10. Right off the bat, this might break some people's hearts, but it was hard finding a spot on this list that I feel comfortable with putting this at. And I just couldn't justify it, truly. I just couldn't. Compared to every other flashback, they're all the ones that are on the list have a little bit more of a fleshed out story than what this flashback is, and I'll just stop teasing it. It's Brooks' flashback. It's tough because it is one of my favorite moments in the series. I don't think as a flashback it's the entire package. It definitely has the gut punch, Brooks starting up the final song for him and his crew to record on the dial is heartbreaking, as his crew die off one by one, knowing full well now by the point that this flashback happens that they're recording it for Laboon, so he always has something to remember them by, and it is really heartbreaking, truly. Um, but a lot of Brooks' story is also told throughout Thriller Bark in that he doesn't have a shadow. He's been gallivanting around avoiding Moria zombies by night and hiding at day. Um, and so this really is kind of it's just a short, I don't even think it's more than a couple chapters, if that. Um, so I don't know. It just doesn't really get me as much as it probably did for some other people, and that's totally fine. I think the moment that always gets me more is after the flashback, which is why I don't think this flashback makes it the cut this go around. But it's the point after the flashback where he's singing along with Luffy and he's just about to join the crew if he hasn't already. I'm a little fuzzy on the details. But he just starts crying while he's playing the piano. He's like, I'm glad I stayed alive for all this time, or something along those lines. And that line always hits so hard. But it happens after the flashback, so I can't give the flashback credit for that. So that's going to be an honorable mention for me, personally. I'm also going to throw Zoe in here. I'm not going to go too long on that because we've had longer discussions on the entirety of the Zoe arc in general, but I felt weird putting that in here on a list of flashbacks when it is kind of not necessarily a stereotypical flashback that you might expect for the One Piece. It is telling you how this arc happened, but in a just disjointed fashion, so I didn't feel comfortable actually placing it on my list. But that's a really solid arc. If you've read Zoe, I don't need. I'm not saying anything different. Super surprising here. So shout out to that. And then my final honorable mention is the brief flashback we get with Katakuri and Brule after his fight with Luffy. It's a really sweet and touching flashback about these two characters that have been fairly antagonistic throughout the time that they spent on screen. And then you get this flashback as Luffy and the others are running and escaping from Whole Cake Island, and you get a flashback of how these kids were teasing Brule and how they called her ugly, and then they slashed her, and that's why she has the scar on her face that she's had this entire time. and Katakuri steps in, and they bully him too for his mouth, and you just have it's a tough scene to read and watch because it is these two kids getting bullied and one getting maimed forever, honestly, and it's them coming together at the end of the flashback that really always speaks to me. Is sibling bonds is always something that is a theme and a motif that resonates with me strongly. um, so that always resonated with me a lot. And so and again, it's not a super drawn out flashback. I don't even think it's a full chapter. um, so that's why it's only an honorable mention. Hey, it's me, Pat, from the future. I had a sudden recollection that I recorded a top 10 One Piece flashbacks video and mixed the order up a little bit. So let me talk about a couple of things real quick before we jump into the list proper. All right. So first of all, on my previous list, I had Chopper's flashback at number 10, and I'm gonna switch that with another flashback. I don't think it'll mess up my rankings too much. Um, but you'll see there a lot of mistakes were made when coming up with the list here. But so Chopper's flashback is going to be my final honorable mention, and I'm just going to throw it out there. It's a really good flashback. I tear up almost every time I read it. It's touching. It's sweet. Chopper is such an adorable little fur ball. How can you hate him? Um, but man, I don't know. I'm just not a huge fan of Dr. Hirolik. I think he has a really baller speech at the end of the flashback where he's talking about when people truly die. Um, but he kind of starts off as an asshole, and I don't know, that never really goes away. But I do like how much of Chopper's character is rooted in this flashback, and how it ties into the larger themes of the Jolly Roger and what it means to be a pirate, especially to Chopper and to Wapple and Luffy. So I just like that it plants the seeds for that thematic bearing of fruit towards the end of the arc. That being said, it's an okay flash. I think compared to the rest here, there really wasn't any good place for me to put it. But I did have to mention it. I did have to mention it, and that leads me to my true number 10. That will be Law's flashback. Now, originally I had this little higher on the list. Then I got halfway through recording and then realized I had forgotten a flashback, and so Law's flashback got relegated to the honorable mention because I didn't want to re-record everything. Um, but here we are. I had to put it at number 10 because I do like it more than Chopper's. I think it's a really good flashback. I think we get some really decent world building with like the getting a taste of Law's home and where he's from and what happened to his family, while also expanding upon the Doflamingo family, where they were back when Law was a kid, including seeing a young Buffalo and a young baby Five, as well as even Diaz Drake, meeting him and his dad, and how that's able to tie into the actual through line of the flashback, and how that keeps Law from being taken in by the Navy at a young age, um, which makes a lot of sense considering where Drake is when we meet him and where Law is when we meet him. It's it's a really good flashback, and it's emotional as well. You throw in Corazon, who starts off as an asshole, who has a good bit where he's always getting hurt somehow, and having it all come to a climax when he's muffling Law's voice in the treasure chest so that Doflamingo doesn't find him. It's a sad moment. It's horribly cruel to Law himself. Um, but it does such a really good job of telling you why Law hates this man, where Law comes from, but also a little bit of where Doflamingo comes from, and that he won't let anyone stand in his way, not even his brother. So I think the flashback really serves its purpose well in establishing motives for our two very important characters. If we hadn't, you know, if we didn't already know what they were about, we would certainly know after this flashback. So yeah, I'm gonna put that at number 10, and we're gonna go back to past Patrick, who will tell you the rest of the list as it was originally. So, and just so you know, because I'm from the future, I got a little bit of tidbits, and I'm not supposed to tell you too much, but I will say, all right, September 3rd, 2024. Watch out. That's all I'm gonna say. All right, have fun with the rest of the video. And number nine, and this is immediately after that, because like I see, I'm already second guessing my own list. This might even change tomorrow. But at number nine, I put Robin's flashback. This happens right after Luffy and the gang head up to Ennie's lobby, and they find Robin. And um, we cut to the flashback of Saul telling Robin, "Hey, someday you'll find people that will truly care about you." And I think that's what's at the core of this flashback, because throughout like the first half of this flashback, Robin's with the scientists and the doc and the researchers of O'Hara, right? And her mom's out there doing revolutionary things. I might be getting that detail wrong, but she's out and about doing things with other researchers and scholars and learning more about the Void Century. Um, and to Robin, that reads like she never really cared about her, and that's always what gets me in this flashback. It's never Saul. Saul doesn't make me cry. I do like Saul a lot. That's not to say I don't like Saul. And I think telling her how to laugh in times of pain and suffering really comes back full circle at the end of this and just breaks your heart. So Saul gets full credit for everything he does for this flashback, but he's not what makes me cry in this flashback. It's Robin finding her mom, Olvia, right as the Buster Call's getting ready to be launched, right as the Marines are, forcing their way onto the island. And Robin is like, "I'll have no better opportunity than this. Hey, Mom, why would you abandon me like that?" And their heartfelt conversation that ensues after that just breaks my heart, because now she finally has her mom back and she's cruelly taken away from her. So that is firmly why Robin's flashback is on the list. I'm questioning how low it is now, because it is a really good flashback, and it's still relevant today. We still get mentions of Saul, of the scholars of O'Hara, like they are crucial to the story of One Piece. Um, but I don't know, because looking at the rest of these, I can kind of see why I'm putting it down this low, but we're gonna keep going. Maybe I'll modify the list as we get going. But at number eight, I am gonna have the Mount Corvo flashback with Luffy, Ace, and Sabo. This takes place right after Marineford. Jinbei is trying to. I don't even think we're back on Amazon Lily at this point. I think this flashback kind of just happens before we cut to Luffy losing his mind that Ace is dead. And it's I placed this one a little lower because it does evoke emotions and feelings from you, but mostly because it happens right after Ace's death, and you have Ace after Sabo is killed, and you have Ace promising Luffy that he's never gonna die, and it's knowing what we know is happening in the present, it's like a further twist of the knife, and so while it does give you those emotions, it is kind of a cheat code, honestly, for making me feel more. Um, but what I really like about this flashback is the way it shows Luffy developing his bond with Ace and Sabo, who we really didn't know existed before this point. We got hints and teases a few chapters before, but really nothing about Sabo before that, which I'll come back to in just a second. But seeing Luffy follow Ace and Sabo to their base to find their treasure, and then being kidnapped by the Port Army pirates, and Blue Jam's like punching him. He's trying to get him to talk about where they're hiding their treasure, and he's like, "I won't tell." Um, I might have gotten that pirate crew wrong, but I know Blue Jam's involved. Blue Jam. Um, but it's a really touching scene of this of who will eventually become the younger brother trying to fit in with his older brothers, and again that sibling thing, that brotherly thing, especially someone who grew up with two brothers, like that's something that resonates with me. And especially knowing who Luffy is by that point, and granted he's like 4 or 5 when all this is happening, but seeing kind of who he was even back then, it's like, yeah, that's Luffy to a T. Like, he's terrible at lying. It's one of my favorite moments is that he's awful at lying. They know he's lying, and that he won't rat out his soon-to-be brothers, so they beat the snot out of him. Um, but it's so I love that aspect of it. But what I also love about this is that Windmill Village that you saw in chapter one, There's more to it than that. It's part of a larger Goa kingdom, something we get fleshed out in this flashback. It's where Sabo's from. He is technically noble blood, but he kind of refutes that. He doesn't like having any part of that. And seeing just the world fleshed out in that respect, like it's kind of a big deal. It's why you have Trash Mountain and why the nobles want to burn that down is because they're having a celestial dragon come visit, and there's a lot of really good like world building in this, and again tugs on the emotional heartstrings because you have Dadan, you have Luffy, um, that are holding themselves back from when Sabo dies. But then you actually have when, and I'm kind of rambling at this point, so bear with me. But when Trash Mountain's actually on fire, you have Ace and Dadan holding off the pirates that were hired by the nobles to burn Trash Mountain. It's one of my favorite scenes, and then seeing Ace carry Dadan back, it's like I just love this group, honestly. Um, and it leads to some fun moments in the present, but again, I'm not counting that. Um, so yeah, all in all, really solid flashback. It's pretty meaty one too. And but again, I have my misgivings. I think the way they twist the knife with Ace, with the, I don't want to call it dramatic irony, but it is kind of like that. It's not that. But also, I don't love the introduction of Sabo here. I flounder on whether or not I like Sabo. I think he's fine as a character now, but it really was tough getting this introduction to this character, seeing how he's killed, and everyone was like, "No, he's not dead." And then getting to Dressrosa and getting the excuse we got, and that kind of sours my experience with this flashback a bit. I don't love the amnesia trope that Oda uses with Sabo. Um, that kind of gives him an out for not showing up at Marineford, but not doesn't pertain to this flashback really. I think this is a strong story in and of itself. You could tell the story on its own, and I think it stands up incredibly well. So that's why it makes the list and is at number 8. Number 7. This one's a personal favorite of mine, but when I started comparing it to the other flashbacks, I had to put it a little lower on my list. And that is the Noland and Kagura flashback. This takes place in Skypiea. This is when we get the true story of Nolan the Liar. When he did find Jaya, when he did find the full island that would eventually become Skypiea. And I really love this arc because it fleshes out, again, world building. I'm a sucker for it. It fleshes out the culture in the island that Luffy and the others are battling for their lives on at the point that this flashback takes place. And we had the seeds planted at the beginning of the arc when Cricket had that storybook about Noland, who happens to be his ancestor, and we get it from his perspective, and we also get a little bit from Kagura's perspective. And I really love it because it is just a tale of what could have been a tale of like Pocahontas, where colonists come and find a place with a bunch of native people that are living there, and it's hostile. Whereas this one starts that way, but they become best friends, and best friends enough to the point where one of them's engaging the other to his daughter. Like they're heroes, they're friends to these people because they cure a disease. Um, and I love that there's a couple of fake outs. Like if you know the ending, there's like a couple of moments where they're like, "Oh shit, is this where they fall apart?" Um, oh wait, no, I got it wrong. I really like the way that they fall out because it feels real and it feels like friends making the tough call to help out the other. When Nolan and his crew cut down the ancestral spiritual trees that the Shandians really place a lot of belief in their faith in, and you can see it on Nolan's face. He's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to hurt. I know it's going to hurt them, but we have to if we're going to save their lives. And they do it, and they get chased out, and it's heartbreaking. And what really does it for me is, and how it sets up such a beautiful ending for the Skypiea arc in general, is Noland is chased from the island, but not before Kagura comes out and screams at his once and forever friend that he understands why he did it, and he's welcome back anytime. Um, and it really hurts reading that, knowing that that next time is never going to happen. Because he brings his, his king back. He's like, we found this bountiful land. It's got all this gold, and it's just not there. And so he gets executed. But even to his death, he's like, no, that island does exist. It exists. My friend Cogger is up there. Go ask him. Um, and it's just a tragic end because he's right. Seeing things from his perspective, he's right, and it hurts. It hurts a lot. Um, but it sets up such a sweet finale to the rest of that arc, with the Golden Bell and Luffy ringing it and Cricket seeing it. So I really love this arc, as it really is just like giving the pass up for the alley oop for Luffy to slam dunk it later. So shout out to that. All right, so number 6 on my list is going to be the Senor Pink flashback. Now, you're probably wondering, Senor Pink? But also, if you've read the flashback, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, this is, I think, how good of a storyteller Oda is, because it's very clear what he's going for here. It's like that. Like, it's such a quick flashback, and you get everything you need to know, I think, in the span of like 1 or 2 chapters, if that. Um, I think it's really good at telling the story it's trying to tell. I think it's emotionally resonant. I think it's a very poignant story of this guy who found someone he could, love forever, and seeing her react the way she does to his lifestyle when she finds out. Um, and him bending over backwards just to make her smile. It's really tragic. It's heartbreaking, and you can't help but feel sorry for Senor Pink, but also feel immense respect for him because he lives the way he does, um, in respect and in honoring his wife and child. And it happens like right towards the end of his fight with Frankie, I believe, and you get a good line from Frankie after their fight's over, and it doesn't pertain to the flashback, but is a line I like. It goes along the lines of, I don't know what your story is, pal, but you've walked a hard life, and I respect that. It's something along those lines. I'm definitely butchering that. Um, but Senor Pink's a character that would seem goofy, but then Oda does a good job of tying it into his story. And is it a flashback we needed? No, quite honestly, I don't think it changes much about their fight and the story of Dressrosa as a whole. But Oda did decide to include it, and it's because he knew what he had, and that's why it's at number 6 on my list. Number 5 on my list of best flashbacks would be the Fisher Tiger and Otohime flashback in Fishman Island. And I'm gonna put this here because I really like the end of it. I think Otohime's death is the highlight for me in Fishman. Not because I like it. I think she's a really good character. I like her a lot. But just the way that her death unfolds, seeing the three princes trying to distract Shirahoshi because they're pretty quickly able to figure out that she can control the Neptunians, um, and that's why they have those verbal tics that you see them with throughout Fishman Island up to that point. So again, kind of like with Senor Pink, you see these people with weird verbal tics, and turns out they have it for a reason, a very good and heartbreaking reason. Um, but I also, it's this flashback isn't just about Otohime. Jinbei's present in both Otohime's segment and Fisher Tiger's segment, and he's just kind of there to experience all of it. But what I like about Fisher Tiger is we also get the introduction of Koala, who does show up in Dressrosa, and again, this flashback plants a lot of seeds. But it also features the return of one of my favorite villains from the East Blue Saga, which is Arlong. And seeing him react the way he does to Fisher Tiger's death, it just connects dots that you didn't necessarily need. Like, I understand why Arlong hates humans. I can just infer why. We don't need to see why, but here it is. Odo is always going to tell the story of Fisher Tiger. Let's just put Arlong there. It makes sense. Um, and I think that the way that Fisher Tiger's death plays out is just super. It's upsetting, honestly. Like, it's heartbreaking. Like, it was something that he did this good deed for humans. He freed a bunch of slaves. He's led a noble life up until this point, and the humans turn on him so quickly. And then he doesn't get the blood he needs, and he dies, and that's kind of where things go at with Fishman Island with blood transfusions, as far as that goes, at least. But again, this is just it's good world building. It's good, dot connecting by bringing back a former antagonist, even having Hachi there, while also planting the seeds for future stuff, especially as far as Shirahoshi's concerned and Jinbei as well. Um, while also showing, hey, Fisher Tiger's death upset a lot of people, but especially a young soldier like Cody Jones, who is the one that ultimately assassinates Otohime. Um, it's a really good flashback about the civil unrest that's happening in Fishman Kingdom at this time, and two different prominent figures steps to integrating fishmen with the rest of the human populace. And it's I don't know. I just like that kind of stuff. I think it's really interesting and fascinating to see how these two different characters work to make things better for their people, even if it ended in tragedy for both of them. So that's why that's going to rank at number five. Now, see, I think for me, the top four were always kind of a lock. I'd say no, the top three are locks for sure. Number four, I'm kind of flip flopping a little bit. I don't know where else I'd put it though. And that is the Rebecca slash Kiros flashback. Um, this is a flashback that snuck up on me. I read it as it happened weekly. So, and like a lot of things that I read weekly, like it goes in my head and then out the other as soon as the next chapter is out. So I don't fully absorb things. But going back and rereading it, past couple of times that I have, it really hit me just how good it is. It starts off innocent enough with, oh, I'm blanking on her name. Hold on. Okay. So it starts off innocently enough with Rebecca's mother, Scarlet, and Kiros meeting, um, and forming their own little love story, and it's super cute because obviously Scarlet can't fall in love with the King's Guard, so then he steps down. It's a lot of cute little build up for them to become a couple, and they have their own little hut out in the sunflower fields, and it's really touching stuff. And then they have their own daughter, and things are good for a little bit at least. But then, of course, obviously, Scarlet is killed after, not long after Kiros is turned into a toy, and it's a one-two punch because you have little Rebecca there whose mom is dying, and who should bring her dead mom but this toy soldier who she doesn't know is her dad. And the line that always kills me, because it's just I can't think of anything crueler that's happened in One Piece. But put a pin in that because we'll get to it. Um, where you remember who you are, you remember your relationships with your people, with your friends, with your family, with your loved ones, but they don't remember you. And for him to hold his dying wife like that and not be able to feel the warmth leave her body, and you bring her to your daughter, and she's like, "What did you do to my mom?" And it's such a harrowing scene. It's so heartbreaking, and to see them build up their relationship over the years as Rebecca grows up, as she enters the Coliseum, it's like she didn't necessarily know that was her father while they were growing up together, but he kind of became her father again in a weird way, and I think there's something really special about that. Um, but for sure, that scene in the sunflower fields when it's raining and he's holding her dead body, Scarlett's dead body, and Rebecca's freaking out, one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the series for me. Like truly and honestly, it breaks my heart every time. So that's going to place that firmly at number four. I said I was flopping around on it, but thinking on it more, it's like no, we're keeping that at number four. Top three are locked though; those aren't going anywhere. And I think even if the rest of these kind of flip flop in order, these top three are going to remain pretty consistently at the top. Number three is Nami's backstory. Now, a little bit of background on my time with One Piece. I started watching it when it was on Toonami, when the Four Kids dub was reaching the end of Alabasta, and that was my entryway into One Piece. So I didn't necessarily know the stories of these different characters. So when I eventually did wise up and start over from the beginning, um, Arlong Park was when I truly, truly fell in love with the series for the first time, for real. And it was Nami's flashback that just broke my heart. And there's, obviously that helped me seeing that happens not long after that, that also tore my heart out and stomped on it. But it was Nami's flashback that really tore at me. It tore me apart, honestly. Um, you have this strong mother, Bellamere, which in French means good mother. Clever, clever. As she has stepped down from the Marines to take care of these two orphans that she found on a battlefield, and we can point at it's all about Nami, but it's really all about her and her found family. None of them are related by blood. None of them are actually related, but that doesn't stop them from having a happy life together. And that's something that Nami, in her youthful ignorance, kind of spits on. Even and it's like she couldn't help it. She's a kid. But it ends up costing her mom's life, and for the rest of her life to be kind of indebted to this fish man, and it's really heartbreaking and tragic. It's one of those things that I always think about, because it's such good storytelling. Because it's like, of course, this kid's gonna be like, she gets angry in a fit of anger. She's like, "You're not my real mom." But before she's able to make up with it, I'm gonna get emotional thinking about it. Thinking about it. But before they can make up for it, she is cornered by Arlong. He's asking, "Why do you have three play sets? What's going on? You don't have two extra kids you're hiding, do you? You have to pay more. You couldn't afford that." And to see her, instead of denying that she has these two kids that she's not related to by blood, instead of running from that, instead of denying that, she's like, "Nope, these are my kids, and I love them dearly." And it's right after that, I'm tearing up. It's right after that when Nami and Nojiko run out and they just hug her, and my heart's I'm gone. I'm crying. I'm tearing up. And you have that very brief spark of hope when Bellamere is able to pin Arlong to the ground with a shotgun in his mouth. And you're like, in the back of your head, you're like, "Oh, she could get away right now. She could do this." But then you're like, "No, wait. Would Arlong still be in control of this island if Bellamere wins here?" And pretty much right after you have that thought, he bites down the gun and it turns the situation around completely. So man, it's so heartbreaking. And I mean, what more can be said about it other than that? Like, you get a really good idea of where Nami comes from and why she values money as much as she does, because she's been indebted and needs to save it to buy her village back, but also why she attaches so firmly to the Straw Hat crew. They're her new family now, especially after Along Park, and she's not taking that for granted, not ever again. And this flashback does a really good job of establishing who she is and why she is, while also breaking your heart into a million pieces at the same time. So, mad shout out to that. Number two, I really thought about putting at number one, but we'll get to why I didn't. And this flashback is the Odin flashback. Now, beyond this, well, I'll probably add an edit at the beginning of this video. Anyway, number two is the Odin flashback. And now I debated this because I do feel like it's a little bit of a unorganized, I don't want to say mess, but I do feel like this flashback has a couple of different purposes. I usually call it the Odin slash Roger flashback because after a certain point, it kind of becomes more about Roger than it does Odin. Only for it to come back to Wano and be more about the end of Odin's life. In that respect, I do think it's a little disjointed, but I can't really give it too much fault for that because what we get in this flashback is so strong. Not only do we see the beginnings of Odin and his soon-to-be rule, we also see some seeds planted for the Kurozumi clan to take over Wano. We see a lot of different seeds that take that bear fruit in modern day Wano. But we also get Whitebeard and his crew, young Whitebeard, and seeing them interact with Odin, seeing them interact with Roger's crew, especially with Shanks, Buggy, and Blackbeard interacting the way they do. Seeing a young Marco and seeing how Izo joins Whitebeard's crew. I mean, that's really what I love about this flashback is seeing legends, modern legends, at their peak in a sense. Um, Coming together like that, seeing Roger and Whitebeard's camaraderie and their respect for one another is truly, it's really, as a longtime fan, really cool and gratifying to see. Um, but what puts this at number two for me is more or less the Roger stuff. I think while it does give us, because it gives us a lot of answers and it teases a lot of things, but then it gives us even more questions like, why the heck couldn't Buggy go on to Laughtail? Why couldn't what did Roger tell Shanks that made him break down like that? What's but we do finally, and this was a come to Jesus moment for me, honestly, when Roger learns the secret of the One Piece, and you have that double page spread, and it says he just laughed. That was his reaction to finding the One Piece and learning the secrets of the world. He just laughed. And it was that double page spread that made me think, well, shoot, we're little shy of 1,000 chapters into this series, and the end is actually in sight. It won't be that much longer now that Luffy has the same discovery before we're here with Luffy and his crew and learn what the secret is with them. And it just kind of resonated with me in a way I didn't fully expect because we don't really see anything. We just see their reaction to it. Uh, so it really more so than the fact that the final saga begins not long after Wano ends. It was this part that made me think, oh wow, we're really approaching the end sooner rather than later. And so it wasn't inherently sad, but it did make me cry reading that. I'm like, man, this series I've enjoyed for so long is coming to an end. The end is in sight at this point. Um, and then we get the rest of the flashback. I mean, I like a good, go. The show Seven Samurai. I love that stuff. I know it's based on a movie, but it's that kind of thing of a samurai gathering his vassals to go into battle against evil. That's pretty much the first part of this flashback, and then you get the Roger stuff, which I love. Um, but then you also get the tail end of that stuff. You come back and you find Wano more so what it's like in present day. Kaido's back. All this. Orochi's in charge. All this other stuff. Not to mention, we see Bon Clay's fruit. We also see Bardo's fruit, which is just fun little pieces of world building. It's like, well, of course, these people probably had, some sort of ability. We just didn't expect those abilities. And I'm definitely rambling, so I'm going to get to the other significant part of this arc, which is Odin's execution. Now, up until this point, him dancing and nothing but his skivvies didn't do much for me. It was a question of, what are we doing here? Why are we wasting our time with this? I don't think it was really good use of page space. It doesn't. I don't think it lasts that long for me to really complain about it, but it's not my favorite thing. But the Hour of Legends, the feat of Odin standing in boiling oil for an hour, and then having to be shot, not even dying from the boiling oil, is something that will stick with me forever. I think it's one of the better death scenes in One Piece. Um, and him throwing out his tagline, "My name is Odin, and I was born to boil," right before he gets shot. Throwing his and not long after he's thrown his vassals, and he says, "Open the gates of Wano. You need to live." And then seeing the tail end of things where Toki's given her prophecy and is able to save her son and some of the scabbards by sending them forward in time. It's really, it is kind of, there is a lot happening in this flashback. It's a longer one for sure, and I don't think it all serves the same purpose, but I do think that the Roger stuff is super strong, and while I think the Odin stuff is a little less strong, I still think it is really good and serves a purpose of making you angry, making you upset, setting up Kaido and Orochi to be taken down by Luffy and the rest of his crew in the present. So I think in that respect, while teasing the end of the series, it also teases the end of Wano, which is incredibly important to reaching the end of the series. It's a good flashback. It's really good, super solid. Um, Gets me going. It gets me excited, but also kind of makes me a little like weepy because like, man, I'm not ready for the series to end, but I am ready to get for the series to end, honestly. But speaking of, number one is a manga spoiler, so if you're not caught up on the manga, I probably should have thrown this disclaimer at the beginning of the video. Um, so I'll give you a few seconds to leave. If you want to wait and see what the flashback is about, stick around, I guess. I don't know, you do you, but this is your warning. I will drop it in three, two, one. All right, so my favorite flashback, and I really tried to not let recency bias weigh this one so heavily in my favor, but the more I thought about it, the more I feel like it does what I love with Odin's flashback and mixing it with other pieces of really good flashbacks like Nami's, and that's Kuma's flashback. This one covers his early life as a buccaneer, something we still really don't know much about at this point, as of me recording this video. And knowing he has this blood, he's desired by like world nobles and the government. They're trying to shut that bloodline down. And just seeing how awful Kuma had to begin with, becoming a slave of the celestial dragons, fairly young age in life, and not being able to do anything about it. He just has to smile and grin his way through it. And his dad is shot right in front of him just for talking about Nika. And so seeing that, it's cruel and hard because this kind soul that we know at the rest of this flashback paints his beginnings, the beginning of the flashback, in a much more like admirable light. Like he went through all of that and still ended up becoming the loving dad that he did. Um, and Tying his escape into the God Valley incident. That's not something I don't think anyone saw coming. But seeing that little bit of world building and getting, teases, because we didn't see all of God Valley, which this necessarily isn't the flashback to do that in, so I get why we didn't do that. But it, you know, giving us an idea of just what exactly went down there with the Rocks Pirates, the Celestial Dragons, with the slaves like Kuma and Ginny and oh my, Ivankov. It's really good world building. Just of course, it makes sense. It lines up. The timeline lines up. So yeah, I have been talking for a while, so I'm going to speed this up a little bit. But then we get his relationship with Ginny and how if things didn't go the way they did, they probably would have gotten married. They probably would have had a kid together. That's just not how things worked out. And so we get probably some of the darker stuff that's happened in this series, and that's saying something. Where Ginny has a child in a forced marriage, so that's just there's just no painting that in a good light. That's just awful and horrible. But that's how we get Bonnie, and it breaks your heart knowing that Kuma isn't necessarily Bonnie's real dad, but that he stepped up to become a real dad for her, and her at the time incurable disease, and seeing them come together and grow up in this church while he's trying to help her cure this disease, um, to the point that he's willing to throw away his humanity. And that's what really gets me about this. Like, learning what we learn about who gave Ginny and Bonnie the disease that they have. We don't learn that in this flashback, so I'm not trying to let that weigh things too heavily. Um, but just learning all of that and then having Kuma go to uh, Vegapunk and offer himself up and be like, hey, I've got Buccaneer blood. I've got really good physique. I think I would be a prime candidate for the cyborg project you're undertaking. And for him to be willing to just throw it all away just to save his kid. And with the promise of, hey, telling Bonnie, hey, we'll go on plenty of adventures once you are fully cured of your disease. But him not being able to hold up to that promise. It's really heartbreaking. And he has this line that absolutely broke me. It's probably going to break me here, where um, Kuma is about to undergo the procedure to become a cyborg, and he's like, "Was I? What does he say? He says something along the lines of to Vegapunk, who's his buddy, right? I'm sorry, I was such a burden to you." And Vegapunk, while he's pressing the buttons to make this procedure happen, is like, "You fool! Anyone who knew you would never say that you were a burden." And he's crying his tears out, his eyes out. And it's at this point, reading this chapter, I was beside myself. This is probably the one of the very few moments we've gotten in recent One Piece that has gotten me to break down and just I had to put my phone down. I had to like walk away for a second. Like it truly broke me. Um, it it's heavy stuff. It's a lot of heavy stuff that's happening in this flashback. While we also have really good world building, while we set up uh, some payback, some long overdue payback for Kuma, for Bonnie, for everyone that's been mistreated by the Gorosei, which ties beautifully into this arc. I think the way he's talking to Bonnie, like more than once about seeing Nika, that's his life goal to find Nika and lay his eyes on him. Whereas in present day, again, spoilers for where we are in the manga, like he and Bonnie have both seen Nika, and it's really good setup while also smashing your heart into a billion pieces and giving you good world building. I truly cannot think of a better flashback in One Piece. I tried not to let my recency bias skew this decision, but at the end of the day, I don't think Oda's done it better than this. I do think the pacing is a little bit off. Um, Throughout certain points when you're jumping forward in time, I feel like that Oda wanted to do a little bit more with some of the characters, namely Ginny. But I think the end result was so strong and so powerful, for me at least, that I have to put it at number one. Um, so yeah, I think with all that being said, that's gonna do it. This is my top 10 flashback list. If you like what you see here, cool. If you don't, tell me what's wrong in the comments below. Leave a like on the video if you want more of what we do. Seeing the likes in the comments encourages us greatly. Like seriously, you don't know how much it means to us. And if you're not subscribed already, be sure to do that. Hit the notification bell so you know that when we upload a new video or when we go live. And speaking of, we stream every Monday, and now for a little bit, we stream on Fridays as well. Um, and it's usually just some fun gameplay with me, John, and Austin, if that interests you. But we also do trailer reactions, movie reviews, TV show reviews, and of course, One Piece chapter reactions and discussions when those happen. So as soon as the Void Month's done, be sure to come back here on Sundays to see our latest reaction to the latest chapter. But yeah, that's all I got for you guys. Thank you for stopping in. Um, yeah, I can't think of a good outro, so I'm just gonna say take it easy. I love you, and be good to one another.